Thank you very much for being here. I know that a lot of people here has been looking forward to your presentation, especially of course on the strategy, the work that is expected, that is now initiated. It's all yours, and I'll be back in a few minutes.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I need to correct one of the former speakers. I've never ever tried to compare the oil industry to cholera. I think we referred to tuberculosis, but it was in a very specific context. So I'm not really comparing you as such to dangerous diseases. I was happy to be given the opportunity to meet so many key national and international devotees to the joint exercise of exploring the North Sea. I'm sorry for not having been able to sit with you through the day, but I've been busy, and I always seem to be that whenever there's something interesting, but this would have really interested me. So I'm happy to be able to close the summit by offering my views, and I know that I'm the last speaker, and well, I will try not to be too harsh on you, and you may seek solace in the fact that I am, in fact, the last speaker, and then you can get on. I'm very happy with the oil industry. It has helped society develop and economies to grow in times when man had no other means of motion. And for some years, however, we have seen the warning signs ahead. And when you see how it pours today, it might not be a forewarning of the weather that we are going to face in the coming years. We have the IPCC, the UN Climate Panel, and its hundreds of scientists to agree that the use of fossil fuel releases greenhouse gases and it causes the planet to warm. And that's a threat to life as we know it, because the ice is melting and the seas are rising, and rising temperatures make dry areas of the planet inhospitable, and wet areas too because of extreme rain and flooding. This is fact. It's also a fact that we have to do something about this man-made global warming now. And because the scientists warn us that inaction will have irreversible consequences, and they will be much more expensive to deal with later. And that's why we need to gradually stop the use of fossil fuels. And this government has set the goal, and that is to become fossil-free by 2050. But we still need oil and gas in this time of transition. So I carry these messages too, that it's way too early to shut the valves. And together we can still develop this business, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. And these are important points on my part. I heard one of the speakers say that all we talk about is wind turbines, so no one wants to join the oil business. Well, there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's not time to turn off the valves, and I'm happy to be here, for instance. The Danish oil and gas sector has benefited society tremendously for 40 years, and it should be self-explanatory, but here it goes. Firstly, the pipes have pumped up our economy with nearly 400 billion kroner in tax revenue, which is quite a lot. So the constant influx of oil has fueled our economy, but maybe not in a very visible way. The tax revenue has run into the treasury to be equally circulated on the state budget and mixed in and dissolved, and it's like water under the bridge. You can't really see it. And you could also view the value of the oil as icing on our welfare cake. But it's impossible to determine which icings we owe exactly to the oil adventure. We do know that years of oil revenue have bolstered our economy. Also our balance of payments, obviously, which has been in surplus with pretty much the amount of the oil we've produced for some time. The wealth is now helping us to fund the green evolution we're doing. And secondly, the oil and gas sector has to a large extent protected our freedom. We've gone from car-free to carefree Sundays because of a lot of things that stick to oil, even to some degree our sovereignty. We are far less vulnerable to overpricing and political pressure from the outside. I spent this weekend in Milan at an informal energy ministers summit, talking to some of my colleagues from the Eastern European countries. And their view on energy security is, of course, very different from mine. They feel threatened. We don't. You can take the credit for that. Thirdly, the industry obviously employs a varied workforce, and its activities affect the whole of today's society. And I guess you could say the industry is highly skilled, but practical, and it engages engineers as well as the coverall workers. And it's international and local at the same time, and it benefits struggling communities outside of Esbjerg. I heard multiple references, sorry, outside Copenhagen. I heard multiple references to Esbjerg just now at the last setting here. And it's specialized, but it's also versatile. And the industrious working environment rubs off on a lot of other businesses. And I've certainly myself talked to a lot of companies involved in both green and traditional energies. And there's certainly an overflow between the two. There's no doubt the oil industry has been leading our country's technology-driven and export-oriented business sector. The industry has trained young men and women with the technical skills and international outlook to succeed anywhere in the world in any area of business. And these skills have also been useful in the offshore wind industries. Offshore construction is a promising area for continued collaboration and synergies. So historically, presently, we owe a lot to the oil industry. We must offer the industry a long-term license to operate. A big oil rig is not something you launch one day and then just dismantle it the next. It's a stable business environment also for the oil industry will benefit the long-term investor relations of our entire nation. We don't need the insecurity of stop-go policies. We need oil until 2050 when Denmark is to be powered only by renewables. It's more difficult to look further into the future. It's quite hard already to look as far as 2050. But anyway, beyond 2050, I'm sure petrol engines will most probably still be running in other countries. And if the industrialized world makes sure we stay safe within the UN 2-degree target, then the developing world may be granted growth on special terms. Nevertheless, we have to face the challenge of global warming. It is, of course, one of the biggest issues of our time, even when you look at all the rivaling major issues such as unrest and disease. Future generations obviously deserve a solution. Less fortunate people in the third world deserve a solution, and obviously so do we. More and more people actually demand a solution. You see it in the streets where hundreds of thousands of demonstrators took to the streets in New York City during the Secretary General's climate summit just last week, I think. Yes. You see it in everyday life when people change habits. They switch to electric cars and they recycle their stuff and they begin growing their own vegetables. So there is a move towards action. And you can also see that the consequences of climate change is very clear. And I just witnessed this, how the change in sea ice extent affects living conditions in Greenland, which is obviously close to the heart and close to the political life of Denmark. Maybe because of these clear changes, I've also witnessed a change in the mood of the world's decision makers on my trip around the world, in China recently, in South Africa recently, for example. I'd say we're not yet staring into the abyss, but we can see the edge from which to stare. And Denmark, this government, will not be responsible for throwing the planet off the cliff. We are going to move steadily towards a fossil-free future by 2050. And luckily, we have the technology to stay within the limits. New fossil-free technologies are slowly but surely beginning to meet or even exceed the capability of old fossil technologies, especially land-based wind turbines. They're now cheaper to introduce than other sources of electricity, although still in the need of initial funding. But, as I said, for years to come, we need oil, we need gas in order to have an efficient energy mix, which is why I'm so pleased to note that Oil Gas Denmark contributes so wholeheartedly in the forming of our new oil and gas strategy. So we can find solutions to decreasing recovery rates and aging facilities and rising costs, which are very much the challenges we face right now. We, the government, initiated this strategy work in April to ensure an efficient exploitation of the resources of the North Sea. And together with you guys and Oil Gas Denmark and other key public players, we are going to reach that goal. We plan to present, as you know, the strategy in May of next year. And I'm really pleased, I'm actually thrilled with the cooperation established in Oil Gas Denmark. I think that the industry should continue to compete with each other on meaningful terms, but also with cooperate on others. You should keep cooperating on the continued work safety and eco-friendly standards of operation. These are crucial points. And stand stronger on the global market. I've also asked the Danish Energy Agency to work together with Oil Gas Denmark on this new energy efficiency plan. It's common sense. You don't want to lose on the carousels what you've just earned on the swings. The oil and gas sector must commit to saving energy and cutting emissions of greenhouse gases. And the new plan builds on the old one, which has already reduced the energy consumption by 21%, which is an amazing number. Along with decreased flaring, this has cut the CO2 emissions from our production facilities a lot. And congratulations. That's your good work. And good luck improving the results further. I mean, it's not going to be easy. Mature fields are, I suppose, a bit like grumpy old people. They're more difficult to come to grips with. But I guess nothing is too hard to do for companies that can drill to 5,000 meters horizontally. I'm very impressed with that. Let me finish by reminding you that the 7th licensing round for oil exploration in the North Sea is closing on October 20th. We've set up a more predictable regime, we hope. That was our intention. For future rounds, we plan future rounds to be launched approximately 1 year after the previous one. We are going to need oil for years to come in order to have this reliable energy mix, which is one of the things I strive to get. But the warning signs are clear. The burning of coal, oil and gas must cease, and in this country by 2050. However, because of the progress we're going to make, we will see the oil industry for years to come in an ever more agile shape. So I thank you very much, and I hope to take some questions now.
Thank you very much. I think the main thrust was quite clear. This is your chance to address the minister. We have ample time. Sure. At least from a television point of view. This is a war and a half. My first question would be, reading the whole agenda of this meeting, which is, of course, to attract new investments, develop new technologies, in order to extract still more difficult oil and gas. Here's huge investments. Here's a challenge that the industry is posing to you, the government, the department. Do you agree, basically, that all these efforts should go into extracting still more difficult oil at the bottom of reservoirs far out in the North Sea?
Well, I remember I talked to the Saudi oil minister a couple of years ago in Saudi Arabia. And I told him how we personally relied on extracting oil from platforms 200 kilometers into the sea, to the North Sea. And he said, why are you actually doing that? It would make much more sense, he said, to buy it from us. It's much cheaper, it's much easier to get up. So go ahead, why don't you buy it from us? Which would be the alternative? The EU today, as it is, a quarter of the imports of the EU in total is energy imports. And we spend €1 billion a day importing energy.
Not in this country.
Nope. But we do in the EU as a whole. And if you suggest that we stop exploring for oil, then what you would say is then we should start importing. And that's simply the alternative. The alternative to developing our reservoirs and utilizing what we've got would be to import what we use. We have 2.3 million cars fueled on either petrol or diesel. There are two varieties. It's got to come from somewhere. Right now we do it from the North Sea. So it would have significant economic consequences for us if we stopped doing.
A very clear answer. This tells me that you share the goal of this particular conference.
I do.
Now, you're also a minister of a government. So what do you basically see as the role of government in addressing not only the basics, but the fundamental problems, the concrete issue of attracting new types of investors. We've heard a lot of how the global market changes, how new types of investors are necessary, how leaps in technologies are necessary in order to pursue this agenda. How big a role, how big a supportive role are you ready to play?
Well, we're willing to play a supportive role. And with that we mean we want to do a good analysis of what the realities are and do our bit. And what we can do is, of course, to have a very stable framework surrounding this oil industry. If you wanted to invest in offshore drilling north of Russia today, you would probably think once or twice about the political environment surrounding your investment for the coming few years. Okay, so investment security is one thing we can certainly offer along a time perspective. The other one is a good workforce, a well-educated workforce, obviously. And we've done our bit by trying to make our universities work together with the oil business to provide points of entry for hopeful students of this particular subject.
But I think, judging from the many presentations we've had from experts from around the world, from Norway, from Britain, and of course from industry here, and your own head of department, the challenges will change the profitability. It's not going the right way, if you ask the people in this room. Profitability is going down, challenges are growing. This, in the interpretation, if I may, of this meeting is that the government will have to play a more active role, creating incentives, and I didn't say tax incentives, but somebody else did. Now, what exactly is a supportive role apart from providing parameters?
Well, I mean, that's obviously a good and open question. The key thing we can do is to be predictable long-term and to provide the framework, such as investments. We obviously cannot tax harder than our neighboring countries or tax the oil industry so hard that it simply will refuse to produce. I mean, that would make sense. We've just made a comparative analysis with all the countries producing in the North Sea to see where we are at. We did that recently. Ready to do that again. We're probably not going to pursue a policy that makes us more difficult to operate in than all the surrounding countries. But I'm not ready with tax breaks or stuff like that compared to the present day situation. We believe we've hit a pretty good mix right now.
So what's the strategy all about?
Well, the strategy is all about being, as I said, predictable when it comes to licensing rounds and when it comes.
But isn't Denmark already predictable? It's one of the most predictable and transparent countries in the world.
We strive to be. And then the second point would be an effort with the universities to provide both knowledge and skilled labor.
Well, they've been trying that for ages. Maersk just donated $1 billion. I mean, where is the beef? What's going to happen in order to face the very, very steeply rising challenges of getting the last oil out of the North Sea? Where's the ambition, essentially, in this strategy work?
Well, we have started the strategy work and we hope to get some answers. We want to do things that we know work. We're not going to go into a panic and start doing things impulsively. What we're going to do right, and we're going to do it right first time. That's obviously the best and cheapest way to do things. Which is why we have a strategy process going, which we intend to follow through and we intend to follow up. So that's it.
Mm-hmm. I should, of course, repeat myself. This is a free country. Anybody can say whatever they want. Mm-hmm. Also to the minister, as long as you're polite.
Even that is, flexible.
Now, getting back to the cholera issue, or the tuberculosis, let's not dwell on the past and what you did not say.
I'm happy to repeat it. Yeah.
Rather to say, no, seriously speaking, there seems to be in this room a desire to move the business of oil, gas, and all the supply businesses into a realm where it's more attractive to work there, to invest in this field. But in particular, I think it's an employment issue right now. There is a feeling that the government does not fully, let's say, addresses the issue of the legitimacy of oil and gas. Rather, you speak of the necessity to rid ourselves of our dependency on oil and gas, etc. Are you ready to, let's say, change the way you talk about the oil industry in public?
Well, I would not. I would probably recognize, I've never given it much thought before, that it's true that we use a lot of hype when it comes to the green transition. We talk about the heroics of erecting windmills and saving energies and stuff like that. We have, as I said, the UN climate panel coming to Copenhagen, presenting a report saying that basically if we don't act on this particular subject, on emissions of carbons, then we're toast. I mean, the consequences are almost incredible. So obviously, we address the change we have to make. Now, as I said, this is a two-leg approach. We want to be balanced, and I recognize fully that we are. We're stuck with oil, but not in a bad way. We need oil for many years to come, and I will make no bones about it, and I'll not shy away from saying that. But I don't really know what you expect. Really, should we glorify the business in order to attract youngsters?
Well, let's ask the people out here.
Yes, let's do. How should we phrase it? What can I do?
Mr. Chairman, where's the microphone? Up here, please.
I think we all, as role models for the next generation, hold a great responsibility for being balanced in the way we talk, both about the climate and the climate challenges, but certainly also around how important the industry here is for Denmark, for the nation, and how it'll continue to be that, and that people joining that industry will be equally important to society, as will those that erect windmills or further evolve the technology there. So I think what we would be asking of you is to help us to ensure that happens, that we give people, young people that luckily these days are actually also emotionally attached to what they do, give them an emotional hook on this business, because I think we and the business and the country actually deserves that.
Mm-hmm. There was not a question mark at the end of that, but you were free to comment.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I hear what you say, and there are these huge technical challenges, daunting, and they should obviously appeal to anyone. Could there be anything more fantastic than working on an offshore platform? That's great, that's good stuff. That appeals to me, certainly. You wouldn't want me to drill on 5,000 meters, but I can see the appeal in the life as an oil engineer. I can see the technical challenges, and as I said, there is absolutely no shame attached to it. So I'm all game, but I really find it hard to see the specifics where we're not doing that. For instance, this new center we opened at the Technical University, which is very much an attempt to, make a really visible gateway into this fascinating world.
One other challenge, which has been very predominant today, is the challenge of attracting sufficient amounts of capital.
Yeah.
In an increasingly harsh international competition for capital in this particular field of oil, gas, and energy. Now, of course, predictability in all senses of the word is a key factor. Can you point towards other handles that you find relevant for the government to twist in order to attract these new types of capital that we're looking at, not the old-fashioned investors in the oil industry. We're looking at new types of investors, new trends of investment. Is there anything that you can think of that you find particularly relevant in the short term in order to make the continental shelf of Denmark more attractive to these new types of investors?
Capital has a cold logic to it. I mean, what you want is, of course, the highest rate of return, but you also want a certain security for your investment. And then you try to make a cross between these two. And we can probably not compete on highest returns when we talk about oil fields that has basically already been exploited, and we now need to sort of get into more difficult terrain. So I think our key parameter here would be the predictability and the other stuff I've said. We can probably not make it more profitable than do your investment in, for instance, Siberia or Nigeria, but we can provide something else.
And in, let's say, 5 years from now, let's assume the strategy is worked out in fine collaboration with industry, government. In 5 years from now, what would you hope would be the main achievement of this strategy?
Well, I would want some technological evolutions, maybe even revolutions, that increased the percentage you could extract from the known oil fields, so that you'd have a second round of exploitation with new technologies, increasing the yield from the known reserves. That would be, in my optics, brilliant. That would be fantastic.
And the key obstacle to that goal, what would that be?
Well, it's a chain, and you need every link to be there. So you need the technology, and you need the security for the investment, and you need probably a multitude of other things. But it's not just one thing you need to do that. And what we try to do here is to bring research and industry together to make a dedicated effort to try and solve whatever technological obstacles we face in our very specific conditions out there.
This is your very, very last chance. Yes, please.
I have some ideas for the minister.
Sorry, could you identify
Yes,
yourself?
Sven from Dan Oil again. Sorry about this. I have some ideas for the minister, what he should start communicating. I heard a professor from Oxford a few years ago. He said that the problem with climate change, there are 5 issues. It's coal, China, India, and coal.
And a combination.
And I think the ministers should start communicating that every time we find some gas, natural gas or oil, and substitute that for coal, we are doing a very big reduction in CO2 emissions. So if you can sort of increase oil and gas production, we are all the time helping the climate. And I think that could be a relevant message for the minister.
Anybody else before the minister? Yes, please. In the middle, the lady.
I'm Carolina from DTU. I have a question for the ministers, going back to the topic of the employment and industry and academy. So I still consider that there is a gap between industry and academy in terms of moving the students, just going back to work in the industry. Just thinking that probably sometimes the company think that the person is going to be extremely academic and it's not a hands-on person just to work specifically in the oil and industry. So what do you think that universities can do better, and what do you think that companies could do better in understand when you are going to employ a person that is coming from the universities?
Thank you.
Can I answer that? Or?
Yes, in a second. Let's see. And while the minister addresses those two, a comment and a question, please think about this is your very last chance. Yes?
Today.
Today.
As for the comment on coal, China and India, then obviously that challenge needs to be met with technology. We need to meet that challenge with technology, not with natural gas. It's if you substitute all the coal in the world for natural gas, you would still shoot well clear of the 2-degree target. So you're right that it would, per energy unit, reduce the CO2 emission, but it would still leave the world in an untenable place. So, and as for the role of universities and the role of companies, well, obviously they both have a part to play, and I would particularly point to universities. They should always be relevant to the society into which they release their hopeful students. Which is why I really like the DTU Center, which is based on a collaboration between companies and universities, because you really need to be very, very close to each other. You need to be very specific. And when we have these conditions we do have in the North Sea with whatever geological formations that holds the oil, then of course you need to do very relevant research in it. So really this is a task for the universities, which has been, I think, posed to them in so many words from us, the politicians. I would want the companies also to be very vocal if they do not get the workforce they need from universities. But it's hard to say something clearer than that. I think this is pretty much the mandate of the new center, to be relevant.
Anybody else? Rasmus Helveg Petersen, thank you very, very much for being here today.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks a heap. Help me thank the minister.